I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was one of those evenings where the city felt too small and too loud at once. I was at the corner cafe near campus, the one with the scratched wooden tables and the espresso machine that rattled like it might fall apart. I always came here alone, not by choice, really more like habit. I sat in the back corner, elbows on the table, watching steam curl from my cup. My phone sat face down, unread text stacked like unread chapters. Then she walked in. I'd seen her before, of course, my friend's mom, though I barely acknowledged it in words, just in passing, polite nods. She had this way of moving through a room like she belonged to the quiet corners, folding her coat neatly over her arm, tilting her head just slightly when she scanned the menu. That night, she paused at the counter and glanced my way. For a fraction of a second, our eyes met, and something heavier than a glance settled between us. "Hey," she said, her voice low, unassuming. I clear my throat. "Hi, Mrs. Carver." She smiled faintly, but her eyes lingered on me longer than expected. "I never forget a face," she said, then tilted her head like she was about to walk past but didn't. I noticed the way her fingers brushed the counter as she reached for her coffee, the tiny pause before she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. My stomach tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years, and I had to remind myself to sip my drink before it went cold. We ended up at adjacent tables. She ordered a black coffee. I had my usual latte. And then, this small, absurd thing. She looked at me and said, "You always get the latte with 2 sugars, right?" I nodded because of course I did, but my voice didn't come out smooth. "Yeah, you remember that." Her smile softened. "It's the little things." We didn't talk much beyond that. The clink of spoons against mugs, the soft hiss of the frother, the rustle of pages from someone reading nearby. All of it became a kind of punctuation between us. I watched her fold a napkin, slow and precise, flicking her eyes toward her hands in a gesture that seemed almost intimate in the quiet. I wondered if she noticed me noticing. There was a pause when she laughed softly at something she read on her phone. I realized I was holding my breath. My own loneliness had been quiet, measured, paused thoughts that never landed anywhere, unsent texts, nights spent staring at my ceiling while the world moved on outside. And here she was, a small disturbance in the routine I had grown comfortable with. She finally stood to leave, coffee in hand. I wanted to ask something, anything, but the words tangled in my throat. "See you around." I managed, fumbling with the zipper of my backpack. Her eyes met mine again. Something unspoken hovered there, a gentle caution, or perhaps curiosity. "Maybe," she said, and there was a hint of amusement, almost invisible, that made my chest tighten. Then she left. I stayed there a little longer, pretending to sip my latte, but really listening to the echo of her footsteps fade. My phone vibrated. I glanced down. An unknown number. A text. "Forgot to give you this back. Come by tomorrow." I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. Something in me wanted to reply immediately, but another part, the cautious, measured part, wanted to wait just a little. The cafe felt emptier now, the coffee colder, and I realized that routine had just shifted, however subtly, forever. I showed up the next evening, the text still buzzing faintly in my pocket like it had its own heartbeat. The door clicked behind me before I could second-guess myself. "Thanks for bringing it back," she said, holding up a thin, worn notebook I hadn't noticed at the cafe. She smiled, a little tired, and motioned me in. Her apartment smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books, the kind of scent that made small spaces feel like memory. I nodded, fumbling with my backpack strap. "No problem. I didn't realize it was yours." She shrugged, lowering herself onto the sofa with a quiet grace. "I forget things sometimes," she admitted. Her voice didn't carry shame, just a soft vulnerability. She turned the notebook in her hands, thumb tracing the edge. "This belonged to my daughter when she was little. I kept it after she grew up, I guess." Something in her phrasing made me hesitate. I said nothing. We sat there in a sort of companionable quiet. I watched the way she tucked her legs beneath her, how her hands lingered on the notebook like it anchored her. I wanted to ask questions, but the words felt heavy. So I just sat, letting the quiet stretch. I poured 2 cups of tea from her small kettle, a ritual but it gave me something to do. I set mine on a low table, careful not to spill. She glanced at it, eyes briefly flicking toward my hands as I settled the cup in front of her. That look, just a microsecond, felt like acknowledgement of something unnamed. "Do you ever miss being younger?" I asked, unsure why the words tumbled out. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "All the time. But missing isn't the same as wanting. You learn that eventually." Her eyes lingered on mine, not in judgment, but in quiet recognition. I realized I was holding my breath again, imagining the spaces between us differently, a touch that could linger too long, a shared glance that could mean more than it should. I wanted to leave, to retreat to safe distance, but something in the way she folded her hands over the notebook kept me rooted. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. I admitted, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. Her lips quirked, just a hint of a smile. She reached over, brushing my knuckles lightly as she took the notebook back. The touch was fleeting, accidental seeming, but it carried the weight of unspoken things. My chest tightened, a quiet ache that wasn't entirely regret or entirely hope. We talked in low fragments after that, about trivial things, the neighborhood, the rain that had started outside, her favorite shops. Words never quite landed where they should have, and that was the point. Every silence had its own meaning. When I finally stood to leave, she didn't look away. Her gaze followed me down the hall, and I caught it, soft, deliberate. Something in it lingered after the door clicked shut. The notebook, the tea, the brush of her fingers, they weren't much on their own. Together, though, they were a quiet spark in the rhythm of ordinary life, something dangerous only because it felt so natural. I hadn't expected to see her in the laundry room. Of all places, I was balancing a basket on my hip, socks spilling over the edge, when she appeared by the dryer at the far end. "Oh," she said, startled. She had that soft, caught-off-guard laugh. Her eyes flicked toward mine, then away, tracing the patterns in the linoleum like it was safer than meeting me. "Hey," I said, setting the basket down. My voice felt heavier than it should. We folded clothes side by side, small movements, almost mechanical, almost intimate. I noticed how she tugged a sweater straight, fingertips brushing the fabric in a way that made me aware of my own hands. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck, jammed by the knowledge that this shouldn't go anywhere. She cleared her throat. "I have to run soon." Her hesitation was thinly veiled in practicality, but I could feel it like a weight pressing against my chest. I wanted to lean closer, ask her to stay a little longer, see how far the space between us could bend. But she started loading a dryer, methodical, silent, and I realized she was building a wall. A familiar voice called from down the hall, "My friend," her son. He waved, oblivious, and I jumped a little. She froze. I could see the tension tighten in her shoulders, the way she glanced at the door, calculating distance, timing. I tried to meet her eyes, but she was already folding another towel, deliberate, distant. We carried on, quiet, movements deliberate. The dryer hummed, a low, constant backdrop, and I caught myself imagining her leaning closer, our knees brushing under the counter, her hair falling just so. I shook the thought away, but it lingered anyway, like smoke curling into corners. At one point, she reached for a shirt I'd set aside. Our hands brushed, fingers grazing, accidental but not quite. I froze. She held the contact longer than necessary, then withdrew slowly, eyes lowering to the fabric in her hands. I wanted to ask if she meant to do that, but the words faltered. I cleared my throat a little too loudly. I guess that's it." She nodded, folding the last shirt with a precision that felt deliberate. Then, almost without warning, she looked up. Her eyes met mine, soft, hesitant, and for a heartbeat, all pretense slipped. I leaned a fraction closer, caught in that fragile, impossible moment, and I could feel the pull. The near kiss, the half-confession that hovered unspoken between us. The dryer buzzed. Loud, sharp, breaking the spell. Her hand moved, the smallest gesture, adjusting a loose strand of hair. She smiled faintly, a little apologetic, a little something else I couldn't name. I stepped back, breathing out slow, aware that the tension hadn't left, just paused, suspended. I left the laundry room with a basket of clothes, pretending everything was normal. But in the hallway, I paused, thumb brushing the edge of my phone in my pocket. I imagined her there, watching me leave, maybe wishing I wouldn't, maybe wishing she could stay. And just like that, everything felt closer. The evening was damp, the air heavy with the smell of rain that had just passed. I found her on the park bench by the small fountain near her building. She was alone, coat loosely draped, knees tucked under her. I hesitated, unsure if I should sit. "Hey," I said finally. My voice sounded hollow even to me. She glanced up, startled, then softened. "You're late," she said. Not accusing, just noting. I sat beside her, careful to leave space, though every instinct wanted to close it. We didn't speak for a moment, just listening to the drip of water from the fountain, the distant hum of cars. You know, she began, sometimes I wonder if I'm the only one who notices the small things. Little habits, expressions, things people leave behind without realizing. Her fingers traced the edge of the bench, slow, deliberate. I nodded. I knew the feeling. I had felt it with her, that quiet awareness, the way she saw me in ways I didn't always see myself. "I hate that," she continued softly, "that noticing someone can feel like wanting something you shouldn't, or someone you shouldn't." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I swallowed hard, realizing she was speaking to me, though not fully. My chest tightened, a mix of guilt and longing I couldn't untangle. I wanted to reach for her hand, but froze, thumb hovering over the edge of my own. I don't know what I want," I admitted, voice low, almost lost in the rustle of leaves. "Not fully, but I can't stop noticing you." She didn't move, just watched, eyes steady, reflective. The corners of her mouth twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. I imagined her laughing softly at me, rolling her eyes, and my heart thumped with both fear and desire. A jogger passed, breaking the spell. She shifted slightly, tightening her coat around her shoulders. I wanted to ask more, push further, but something restrained me. The fear of crossing a line, the risk of breaking the fragile equilibrium we'd built. I leaned back just enough to make the space between us tangible. Her eyes flicked toward mine, searching, hesitant. There was a tremor in her lips, a slight catch in her breath. "Do you ever?" I began, then paused, the words almost leaving my mouth. I didn't finish. I didn't want to. The question hung there anyway, unspoken, heavy between us. She didn't answer either, just tilted her head, looking at the fountain. The light reflected in the water danced across her face, highlighting the fine lines I hadn't noticed before, lines that somehow made her more human, more unreachable, more alive. I wanted to close the space, tell her everything I felt, risk it all. But instead, I stayed quiet, letting the tension swell. Her presence pressed close, yet impossible to touch. The rain-slicked pavement reflected the streetlights. Our shadows stretched thin, brushing just enough to remind me that the moment was fragile. And then she asked softly, almost inaudible, a single word that trembled on the edge of meaning, "Why?" I didn't see her for a week. Not a text, not a door cracked open, not the faint aroma of her tea drifting down the hall. At first, I thought maybe she was busy. Maybe the rain had knocked her schedule off. By day 3, I started checking the mailbox more carefully, noticing little things, a misplaced flyer, a folded receipt, a shadow passing behind the curtains. Every sound made me jump, hoping it was her. But it wasn't. When I finally ran into her at the corner cafe, same table, same corner, she didn't smile. She didn't even look at me the way she used to. She sat across from me, stiff, hands folded over her coffee cup. There was distance in her posture, a deliberate wall I didn't understand. "You've been quiet," I said, trying to find some bridge. Her eyes flicked up briefly, then away. "I've had things to sort out," she murmured. Her voice carried a weight I couldn't name. She stirred her coffee slowly, deliberately avoiding the spill. And then, a subtle slip, a word too honest. "It's complicated. Not just with you." I froze. My stomach sank. I wanted to ask, to press, but the pause stretched, impossible to cross. Complications I hadn't imagined now existed, lurking behind her measured words. She didn't elaborate, but the tension, that quiet, pressing tension, filled the space between us. I left that cafe feeling hollow, every step echoing. I imagined her mornings, waking up, pulling on a coat, checking a phone, maybe thinking of me, maybe thinking of something else entirely. My text stayed unsent, my fingers hovering over the keys for hours. I couldn't reach her without risking something I wasn't ready to define. I found myself at her apartment door once, keys in hand, and then hesitated. The hallway smelled of lemon cleaner, faintly like memory and routine. My heart thumped in that hollow way it does when you're suspended between hope and fear. I didn't knock. I didn't leave a note. I simply turned away. Days passed. I kept her in my periphery, a glimpse at the mailbox, a shadow on the stairwell, a laugh through a window, all reminders that she existed beyond my reach. The familiarity hurt in its absence. At night, I imagined all the scenarios. Her moving on quietly, our hands brushing again in the laundry room, her smile as she told me something I could never fully hear. The tension made my chest tight, but it wasn't heartbreak. Not yet. Not fully. I sat with the emptiness of waiting, the ache of ambiguity. The emails I never sent. The doors I never knocked. The half-steps I never completed. And in that quiet, suspended world, I realized I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I found her in the kitchen that evening, the light from the window soft and pale, dust motes floating like tiny reminders of stillness. She was washing dishes, sleeves rolled up, and the water ran over her hand with a steady rhythm. The quiet made my chest ache, not with longing exactly, but with the weight of waiting too long. I cleared my throat. "Hey." My voice sounded smaller than I expected. She glanced up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She didn't smile immediately, just paused, letting the quiet stretch between us. I could feel all the weeks of absence, of half-texts, of hovering near doors, pressing down. I started then stopped. Words tangled in my throat. I had rehearsed things 100 times, and still nothing came out right. She turned off the tap and dried her hands slowly, watching me with a calm patience that almost hurt. "You don't have to say anything," she said. Her voice was soft, but there was weight in it, a gravity I couldn't ignore. I swallowed, letting the pause grow. I stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corner of her eyes, the slight tremor of a loose strand of hair. My hands were empty, but I wanted them to mean something. I keep thinking about the last week. About not seeing you," I said finally. My words were simple, almost banal, but each one carried months of hesitation. And I realized, I don't want to not see you. She didn't speak, just tilted her head slightly, a quiet acknowledgement. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, almost nothing, and I felt something shift. "I don't know what all of this means," I admitted, voice trailing. "But want to try, even if it's complicated." Her hands rested on the counter, fingers lightly brushing a dish. Then, the smallest motion, she reached over, brushing my wrist with hers. A fleeting contact, nothing dramatic, but enough to anchor everything I felt. I exhaled, long and slow, aware of the vulnerability in that tiny gesture. I wanted to say more, to explain, to promise, to fill the silence. But she didn't need words. She just watched me, eyes soft, steady, unflinching. I nodded, almost imperceptibly. She nodded back. And then, a simple human connection. No grand declaration. Just her fingers resting lightly on mine. A quiet acknowledgement of shared understanding. "Okay," she said softly. The word hung between us, modest, fragile enough. Enough to let the tension loosen. Enough to let the weeks of absence and uncertainty ease, if only a little. The kitchen smelled faintly of soap and lemon. The window light slanted across the floor. And for a moment, we were just there, two people, breathing, present, connected. Not perfect, not resolved, but somehow exactly where we needed to be. It was a Tuesday morning when I realized things had changed. Not in a dramatic way, not with confessions or proclamations, but in the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. I woke early, brewed my usual latte, and found her sitting at the small kitchen table, black coffee in hand, eyes on the window where sunlight pooled in thin lines. "Morning," I said, voice still a little rough from waking, but calm in a way it hadn't been months ago. She smiled faintly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Morning," she replied. Nothing more, nothing less. That was enough. We moved through the apartment with practiced ease, dishes washed, laundry folded, small jokes exchanged over the clink of spoons and the hiss of the kettle. I noticed her fingers tracing the edge of the napkin again, the same way they had weeks ago at the cafe. It made me smile quietly to myself, a private acknowledgement of continuity, of small threads connecting past and present. Later, we walked to the park bench near the fountain, the same spot where tension had once hovered between us. The fountain gurgled, birds hopped along the wet stone, and we sat in comfortable silence, our knees occasionally brushing, unnoticed by anyone else. I thought about all the times we had almost crossed lines, all the days spent paused and waiting, and realized none of it felt heavy anymore. She handed me my coffee, black, as usual, and I handed her the latte, still warm. "You remembered," I said quietly. "I try," she said, flicking her eyes toward mine, and there was that same faint humor in her expression, the kind that could hold the weight of weeks without saying a word. The weeks that followed were not perfect. Sometimes she left early. Sometimes I lingered too long at the cafe. But the moments we had were ours, quietly deliberate. Shared glances across a crowded room, the brush of a hand on a counter, the simple act of making tea just right. One afternoon, months later, I found myself noticing the lights slanting across the kitchen floor at exactly 8:47 a.m., how it caught the dust and made it look golden. She poured coffee for both of us, and I watched her, and it felt small, ordinary, profound. I realized then that love didn't need to be loud or declared. It lived in shared routines, in understanding, in being seen over years and moments. It lived in the bench, the coffee, the gentle touches, the quiet smiles that said more than words ever could. She reached across the table and brushed her fingers against mine, just lightly, and I didn't pull away. I didn't need to. The weight of all our pauses, all the waiting, all the almost moments had settled into a kind of peace that only we could understand. And as we sat there, coffee warm in our hands, sunlight falling across the table, I thought, not for the first time, that the world could be ordinary and quiet and still feel like it mattered entirely. We didn't need to say it. We just were.